I've always had a vivid imagination, or at least that's what my parents told me. When I think about it now, ironically, I find it hard to imagine. How can you measure an imagination? It's not like when someone dies and they do an autopsy and say, well, would you look at the size of that guy's imagination? Well, it's absolutely massive. In reality, I think labeling a kid with a strong imagination is a way that parents make themselves feel better about the fact that their kid is a bit weird. None of this would have been an issue if we didn't move to that house. If I was the kind of kid who lived rooted in reality and saw the world like my parents wanted me to see it, they might have believed me when I told them about what I saw. That's the real problem about having a vivid imagination. People never know if you're telling the truth. Well, I don't blame them. The boy who cried wolf, it's an important fable for a reason. It's just a shame that life doesn't always work out like the stories we were told. We moved into this new house on my 13th birthday. It wasn't planned. My parents may have been a bit boring, but they weren't cruel. And that date just happened to work with my mom's schedule. They knew I didn't want to go, but it had something to do with my dad's job teaching at a new university and the commute. We packed up our lives and our dog Star and packed it all into a moving van and drove 3 hours to a new city that looked like our old city. By the time we arrived, it was already dark, and so we unpacked and set up the beds. While my dad and I were screwing the posts and the headboards back onto the bed, my mom must have slipped out and picked up a cake and some pizza, so that once we were finished, we were able to celebrate my birthday. We ate on the floor as the growing dusk filled the empty living room with the house's silence enveloped us. It's weird, kind of, it is kind of weird, sleeping in an almost empty house, bare walls, and a whole lot of empty space meant that I could almost hear the house breathing. Because I was so awake, I realized that I had to pee and I got up out of bed. When I was done, I heard something. It came from below and was muffled. It sounded like someone crying or laughing or whimpering. I went downstairs and I could tell that it was laughing. Short jabs of laughter, punctuated by wheezes. I went down the front hallway and stopped in front of the door to the basement that had not been opened yet. Looking back on it now, I couldn't fully understand why I went down those stairs. Isn't there supposed to be something like fight or flight installed in our brains when we are young? I mean, surely I must have been afraid. But still, I went down there. Well, maybe it was my imagination. I think I was picturing a trapped animal and I felt so bad. The smell of mildew and damp air rose to meet me as I descended, and when my feet hit the cold floor, I was in darkness again. A light bulb in the middle of the room stood out, and I pulled the string. Light spread, and I heard the laughter, and I looked around until I saw a door. I went towards it and wrapped my hands around the handle, the sharp, wheezing laughter spurring me on, fueling my curiosity as I turned it. The only way to describe the smell that greeted me would be moldy. It was like being surrounded by moldy bread. It seemed to be a cellar of some kind. My eyes scanned in front of me, and I saw nothing. I let my eyes scan to the right. I had only opened the door wide enough just to let a little light in, and I saw someone sitting on the floor. Shadowy figures scurried around making squeaking noises. I heard dripping water. The second I looked at him before I closed the door and I ran up the stairs, I saw enough to know that it was a man, and he was smiling. He had dark, dirty teeth and eyes that were like black holes. Back upstairs, I was panting. I thought about waking up my parents, but the laughter had stopped, and I thought about going back down to see if he was still there. Oh, but I knew he wouldn't be. Something told me that he wouldn't be. Besides, even if he was there, my parents wouldn't believe me. Just my imagination playing tricks on me again. The next afternoon, I went outside with my mom and Star, working in the garden. I had asked her why Dad didn't want our help in packing, and well, she told me that he was very meticulous about where things went. And I asked her what meticulous meant. Well, it means that he likes order and putting things in particular places. She opened up her garden bag and took out some pruning shears. Now just look at this garden. Someone spent a lot of time on this. It's a shame that it's all overgrown now. Oh, but we can do something about that, right? I nodded. You see these roses? All it takes is some deadheading, and life grows out of decay. She picked up one of the shriveled remains of an old bloom and snipped it. The shears made a sharp snap as she spoke, punctuating her words. Now your job will be to pull any weeds that you see, like those there, she said as she pointed to a number of growing masses of green. As we worked, Star rolled around in the grass. I nearly told her about the man in the cellar, but I just didn't want to ruin a nice moment. Besides, I nearly forgot about what I saw the night before. It might have even been a dream. There's really no way to tell. Now, the rest of the day, it went quickly. I even slept that night until the laughter woke me. It was louder this time. It was louder, and I opened my eyes and rejoined the land of the living. I could hear it closer than before. I sat up and was about to turn on the light when I saw the eyes. They were. He was in my closet. though his eyes were dark, they were darker than the darkness around him, so they showed like tunnels in the night. A rat sat on his shoulder with dark red eyes. The light in my room, it turned on, and I saw his hand move beside him. He was smiling still. A toothy, broken smile that was empty but somehow full. His face, it was morphing. The teeth becoming fangs and the features becoming angular. I thought about screaming. And his smile, it went away. He brought his hands together in front of his chest with the knuckles together and twisted them as if he were choking something or someone, and I didn't scream. His fingers made pincher grips as he was plucking something, and he laughed and smiled again and seemed to fade backwards back into the closet until he disappeared. He dissolved. He was gone. I sprang from my bed. I ran to the closet, throwing the clothes onto the floor, but there was nothing there. Just a normal closet, an empty closet. I ran downstairs into the basement, pulling the string for the light as I went, and I opened the door to the cellar, but nothing was there. It was just normal, an empty cellar. The sound of dripping water. Back in my bed, I felt my blood turning cold. Perpetual shiver. The darkness, it hung heavy above me, and every shadow seemed like it was about to come to life. I went downstairs the next morning, and my parents were still busy putting things away. I was about to tell them about what happened. I had to. It's all become too real when my mom said, "Oh, I let Star out a while ago. Do you think you could go check on him? He's probably out there digging a hole or something." I shivered, and I nodded. My message would just have to wait. I went into the backyard, and I felt the dew on my feet. I couldn't see Star anywhere, and so I went around to the side of the house, by the gate. This time, I did scream. There was our dog laying in the grass. His golden fur was streaked with red, and when I looked at his head, I realized why. His neck was broken. I stepped closer. I saw that his eyes were gone, replaced by some fleshy divots. The useless balls were on the grass, the gelatinous pupils staring up at the sky lifelessly. He lay beside the basement window that had been opened slightly. I could hear the steady dropping of water. My parents, they came around the corner, and I screamed. I was sent upstairs so that I wouldn't see anything, but it was a little too late for that. The rest of the day passed slowly. I had been exiled to my room, and so I spent the time researching my new home. My parents, they wanted me to be aware of current events. more current than my dog being killed. Okay. So, we had family membership to various newspapers. It didn't take long for me to find a recent story about a family's tragic experience in this very house. Like them to move out. The article, it didn't provide much information, especially because it involved the death of a minor. But I could make my own, I could add to it, let's put it that way, alright? Something had happened to that kid, and it wasn't an accident. And it was that man in the cellar. How did they not know about this? I heard footsteps on the stairs a few hours later, presumably after Star's body had been removed. They both sat on my bed and looked at me with tired, solemn eyes. My dad, he spoke first. Look, son, we aren't sure what happened, but we can say that I know what happened, I said. They looked at each other quizzically. I know how this is going to sound, and that you're gonna think that I'm just imagining things, but you have to believe me. And I told them about my encounters with the man in the cellar, and what happened to the other family that had lived here. I gave as much detail as I could, hoping to add to the authenticity of my story. Son, my dad said, now it's completely understandable to try and rationalize these things. It's the human brain, and no, it's not that! I swear I saw him! He's not a ghost, and he's not real either! He's something in between, but he's real. I know that. He turned on my light, I said, pointing to the switch. My dad shook his head slowly. Okay. Show me then. If this man exists, show him to me. Don't you want to call the cops first? He's dangerous. My mother nodded. I'll have my finger on the dial button. Come on, let's go. And so, we went downstairs. My dad, he stopped in the living room, shrugged and grabbed a poker from the fireplace. The damp smell of the basement rose to meet us, and I turned on the light. Do you hear the water? I asked. My dad put a finger over his mouth and he pointed at the door. I nodded, and he went to the door, and I opened it. But I knew the man wasn't going to be there. I didn't even have to look. The cellar was empty. There were no rats, no man, no dripping water. Back upstairs, I sat on the couch. My mom said, Look, we know that you're going through a lot of things right now. Moving, not sleeping, and now Star. It's awful, and your mind, it must be struggling to process all of this. A few... Oh, son, There was some silence. Honey, what would you think about talking to someone about how you're feeling? I didn't even bother trying to sleep that night. I was angry at my parents for not believing me and not letting me have a phone. They wanted me to wait until I was 16. such, I had no way of proving any of this to them. Having snuck a flashlight into my room, I waited. I waited, and I knew that he would come. I just didn't know when or how. But I was going to be ready. I was. Around midnight, I was struck with a powerful urge to pee. I tried to fight it, but I couldn't. Feeling like I was about ready to wet the bed, I didn't think that he would be in the bathroom, but I still looked in every corner. And when I looked in the mirror, I thought I would see him behind me, but he wasn't. I held the flashlight firmly as I went back to my room and stopped by the laughing. I clicked the flashlight on. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, smiling with his dead eyes. I sprinted to the room and turned on the light. My words poured out. He's here! He's at the bottom of the stairs! If you go now, come on, you can see him, come on, we need to go! We need to go right now! We need to leave! Something bad is gonna happen, come on! Their eyes heavy. They sighed in unison. Look, my dad said, this is getting to be a bit much. You really need to try and get some rest. You can go and sleep. No, please, listen to me, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. You have to believe me. My dad sat straight up. You can sleep in here with us if you are scared. That's fine. But this needs to stop. Or there needs to be a consequence. I looked at my mom and she nodded in agreement. I walked out of the room with my head down and I closed the door. Something drew me down the stairs. An urge to do something. To find a way to get rid of him before he did something else. I knew that he was in the kitchen before I turned on the light. His darkness seemed to absorb the light around him, and he smiled at me, and his face had morphed again into somebody who looked like me, but older. His knees, they cracked, and his torso caved in, leaving him looking at me like the victim of a horrific car crash. Why are you doing this? I cried. Please leave us alone. I'll do anything. Just leave us alone. His head was at an angle now, but he still smiled. The rage inside me exploded, and I sprinted at him. He dissolved around me, leaving only a stale smell and moisture on my fingers. I looked behind me, and I saw him on the stairs again. He spoke to me in a voice that was like the creaking of rusty gears. I spied John Moldy in his cellar. Deep down, 20 steps of stone. In the dusk, he sat smiling there, alone. He smiled again. I blinked, and he was gone. Panic, it took hold of me, and I looked all around, and No one, but I knew what this vision had meant. My dad, he would be next. I had to do something. I felt an idea form in my mind. I took my mom's phone that was charging on the counter. We didn't have a landline. It was easier to duck telemarketers, but I went through the kitchen drawers until I found the barbecue lighter. I had no choice. The police wouldn't believe me, wouldn't help even if they did. It all had to be burned, cleansed. My parents, they would understand eventually. I moved to the curtain with a frenzied mania and lit the bottom of it, and it caught, and the flames, they moved hungrily, and I went down the hall and was about to press the emergency call on the phone and warn my parents when I heard a squeaking. The door to the basement was vibrating, and there were skittery little sounds. I stood in paralysis beside the door, watching it shake and bulge on its hinges until it fell towards me. I was covered in a sea of rats. I fell backwards and they poured over the top of me, their teeth and claws jabbering and biting me and pressing me and covering every inch of me, and I couldn't even scream because they were all over my mouth, and I breathed them in and they smelled like death. I fought and I writhed, throwing them off of my face. I couldn't tell you how long that we were on the floor rolling around. Once I could breathe and I could see again, the kitchen was in flames. I wanted more than anything to go to the stairs and warn them, but I couldn't move. The rats, they were everywhere. I wore them like a blanket. Above me, I saw a smoke detector and felt something like relief until I noticed that the wires were sticking out. Someone had pulled them. The flames, they were starting on the wooden banister and moving up the wooden stairs with a wall of smoke. I coughed and I noticed that the rats, they were gone. I looked around and I saw nothing but fire and smoke. I tried to scream, but I had no voice to scream, and then I heard the screams from above me, frantic footsteps and more screaming. The splintering of wood as foot went through the stairs and more screaming. I looked at the front door, the only thing not on fire, and I went through it into the cool night air. By the time the fire department arrived, most of the house was already gone. I was wrapped in a blanket with an oxygen mask as I watched my new house burn along with the bodies of my parents. In the smoke that rose to the night sky, I saw his face, his smile. It was etched into the billowing smoke as it rose upward and dissipated into nothingness.